She ran the first mind game before you finished your second sentence. Not consciously, not deliberately, but the evaluation had already begun. The one her nervous system cannot stop, cannot override, cannot explain to you or to herself. And your emotional frame was being measured against criteria she has never once written down and would struggle to name out loud. There are 5 specific mind games she runs through, 5 distinct tests of your emotional frame, and the man who understands what is actually happening inside those moments does not get rattled by them, does not start explaining himself, does not reach harder. He simply holds. And that specific quality of holding, when everything in her architecture was designed to crack your frame, is the one thing her wiring has been searching for and rarely finding. You did everything right. Everything that looked right from the framework you were given. You were consistent. You communicated clearly and without games of your own. You expressed genuine interest without being overwhelming. You were patient in the ways that patience is supposed to matter. And somewhere in the middle of all that careful, considered effort, something shifted in her that you could not locate, could not trace back to a single decision you made. She became slightly cooler, slightly more evaluative, and you did what a thoughtful, engaged man does when he senses distance building. You tried harder. You showed up more completely, and the more completely you showed up, the further she seemed to drift. Not because you were fundamentally wrong, because you were operating without the map, without any knowledge of the 5 mind games she was actually running, and why, and what the correct response to each one looks like when your emotional frame is genuinely intact. That ends today. There are 5 mind games I am going to name precisely, and one of them, the 4th, is the one I almost did not include, because once you understand what it is testing and how it works on you, you will not be able to unsee it in any dynamic you have ever been inside. Dr. Stephen Porges at Indiana University has spent decades researching what he calls neuroception, the nervous system's continuous, involuntary background scan of another person's safety signals, operating entirely below conscious awareness, faster than thought, faster than language, faster than any choice either of you makes about the interaction. His research demonstrates that a nervous system shaped by relational disappointment does not wait for the mind to evaluate someone. It runs its own evaluation first. It looks for a very specific quality, not charm, not intelligence, not emotional expressiveness, but a stable emotional frame. The body's evidence that the person in front of her will not destabilize when she introduces pressure into the dynamic. Whether she is 28 or 52, this architecture inside her is identical. Her prefrontal cortex might be telling her she is simply getting to know you. Her nervous system is running 5 specific mind games. And what it records in those moments determines whether she ever allows herself to want you in the way she is capable of wanting. Picture her, not a category of women, her specifically. She has built a life that is genuinely hers, a career she earned, a home she filled with the things that help her feel like herself, a network of people who know the competent version of her, because that is the version she has had the most practice showing. She has become extraordinarily skilled at managing everything in her world. What she has not fully made peace with is the longing that still lives underneath all of that capability. The specific, persistent ache of wanting one person she does not have to manage. The walls she carries are not coldness. She is not a cold woman. The walls are accumulated intelligence, built layer by layer after each time she let herself feel something real and watched it transform into a kind of pain she told herself she would learn from. She built those walls not to keep love out, but to keep a particular category of disappointment from reaching her again. And when you arrive in her life, her wiring begins immediately asking one question she will never say out loud. Does this man have an emotional frame strong enough to hold both of us? These 5 mind games are how she finds her answer. Mind game 1, the manufactured distance protocol. She creates space, suddenly, without explanation, often immediately following a moment of genuine warmth or shared closeness, and she watches. Not the way someone watches a performance. The way a woman who has been paying very close attention for a very long time watches for a single specific piece of information. Does this man's emotional frame hold when I remove my warmth from it? The men who respond to this mind game by moving toward her urgently, with texts that explain, with demonstrations of care that are really demonstrations of anxiety, with a visible need for her to close the gap she opened, fail immediately. Not because urgency is wrong or ugly, because urgency communicates that his emotional frame is regulated by her emotional availability. And a woman who spent years learning to regulate her own nervous system does not want to become the external regulator of yours. The man who holds his own ground, who does not freeze, does not punish, does not perform an indifference he does not actually feel, but who simply continues to exist from a stable interior center, communicates something in that steadiness that no text message, however thoughtful, ever could. He communicates that his emotional frame does not depend on her proximity. That is the thing she cannot ask for directly, because asking would mean admitting she had already begun to need it. One sentence of precision before we continue. A man who performs frame stability because he has learned it passes a test is not the same as a man who actually has it. Her calibration for this distinction was built across years of paying very close attention. The difference between genuine emotional grounding and performed grounding is felt before it is seen, and her nervous system reads that difference in under 2 seconds. But this only reaches its full power when you understand what comes next, because without it, everything you just learned can quietly work against you in the exact moment it matters most. Mind Game 2, the emotional threshold test. She says something with an edge, a challenge to a decision you made or a position you expressed, slightly disproportionate to what actually happened, more pointed than the situation seems to require. This is not an accident. This is a deliberate application of pressure to your emotional frame, with 3 possible outcomes. The man who collapses immediately into appeasement, who agrees before examining whether she actually has a point, who softens every position before it fully forms, tells her that his emotional frame is available for erosion. The man who goes rigid and defensive tells her that being honest with him is going to carry a cost she will eventually stop being willing to pay. The man who stays open, who receives the edge without absorbing it as a verdict, who can hold his perspective calmly while remaining genuinely curious about hers, who can say, "I hear you and I see this differently," without needing her to agree, does something rare enough that it registers as evidence. Not evidence that he is agreeable, evidence that his emotional frame is strong enough to hold pressure without either collapsing or hardening. That specific quality, remaining fully present and grounded under relational pressure, is what she has been searching for and finding in the same man far too rarely. I covered the specific neurological architecture of what happens in the prefrontal cortex when a man chooses regulated presence over self-protection in an earlier video, and if you have seen it, you already understand why what comes next amplifies everything you just heard. Mind Game 3, the vulnerability calibration. She offers you a fragment of something real, something small, something carefully chosen, something that cost her something to say. And then she watches, with an attentiveness that looks casual and is anything but what your emotional frame does with it. Do you immediately move to fix it? Do you redirect it back toward your own experience? Do you go quiet in a way that feels like retreat? Or does your frame hold steady, staying fully present with what she offered, without resolving it, without redirecting it, without flinching at its weight? Dr. John Gottman at the University of Washington identified what he called the emotional bid, the small reach one person extends toward another for connection. And his research found that how a man responds to those bids in the earliest stages of a relationship predicts with extraordinary accuracy whether any genuine attachment ever forms between them. She offered you a bid, and her nervous system recorded whether your emotional frame was solid enough to receive it before you had a chance to consciously decide how to respond. I tested him on purpose. I didn't realize I was doing it until he failed, and then I felt angry at him for failing a test I never told him he was taking. That is the honest interior of what these mind games feel like from the inside of the woman running them. She is not executing a cold strategy. She is responding to an urgency that predates language, the urgency of a nervous system that has learned, through specific accumulated experience, that warmth is not the same as a stable emotional frame, and that a man who is present in comfortable moments may be completely unavailable when the moments become real. The mind game is the only evidence available to her. And the men who understand this, who can receive each test not as an attack, but as a question being asked in the only vocabulary her nervous system possesses, are the ones who give her an answer she has not received before. And the men who have lived through exactly this moment, and you know if you are one of them, carry it differently after today. Mind Game 4. The Frame Pressure Application. This is the most invisible of the 5 because it does not always arrive as a deliberate behavior. Sometimes it arrives as simply her being herself, following the natural current of how she processes the world. But the mind game is precise and intentional at the level of her nervous system. She introduces something that places quiet, sustained pressure on your emotional frame. She mentions another man, not as a signal, just in passing, the way anyone mentions someone they encountered. She expresses amused skepticism about something you clearly value. She communicates, through the specific texture of her attention, that her impression of you is not yet finalized. And she watches, with a precision she could not explain and cannot turn off, to see whether your emotional frame holds or begins to reorganize itself around her evaluation. Whether you start subtly adjusting how you present what you think, what you care about, what you believe, based on what you sense she needs to see from you. Because the moment she can feel your frame bending toward her approval, and she can feel it at the level of her nervous system before she has a single conscious thought about it, something in her registers a loss, a specific cooling, the withdrawal of something warm that had been quietly building. She will struggle to explain it because the mechanism runs entirely below where language lives. The man whose emotional frame does not reorganize under this pressure does not prove himself impressive. He proves himself present in the way that actually costs something to sustain, present from a center that belongs to him, not to her evaluation of him. A mature woman does not respond to performance. She responds to the specific evidence that the man in front of her has a frame that is genuinely, completely his own. And her wiring has been collecting evidence of that distinction for years. And the next piece either activates this completely or reveals the one place this principle silently breaks down in a way most men never recover from. Mind Game 5. The Silence Depth Probe. There is a particular quality of quiet she creates, Not the comfortable silence of two people who have earned ease with each other, but a deliberate, slightly charged absence where she stops carrying the conversation and waits to see what your emotional frame does with the space she opened. Most men fill it, immediately. A question, a joke, an observation, anything to close the gap. And she can feel the anxiety underneath the filling. She can feel that the silence was uncomfortable enough that your frame needed to end it for both of you. What she is actually measuring is whether your emotional frame has its own relationship with silence, whether you can exist inside an unresolved moment without requiring her to resolve it. Dr. Helen Fisher at Rutgers University found in her neuroimaging research that romantic desire is most powerfully activated not by comfort or ease, but by calibrated uncertainty, the neural signature of wanting something that is not yet fully available. A man whose emotional frame can hold silence without collapsing into it communicates something that no volume of charming, well-timed conversation ever replicates. That he is genuinely at ease with the unresolved. That the quiet between them is not a problem his frame is responsible for solving. Her body recognizes that quality long before her mind names it. It feels, in the specific vocabulary of her nervous system, like, finally. What I am about to tell you changes how you read everything you just heard, in a way you will not be able to undo once you understand it. She does not run these 5 mind games to test your worthiness. She runs them to test your emotional frame. And that distinction contains everything. Worthiness is a performance question. Do you have the credentials, the presence, the magnetism to qualify? Your emotional frame is a completely different question. It is what her nervous system is actually asking. Dr. Sue Johnson at the University of Ottawa, whose research on adult attachment changed how we understand what people are truly searching for in a close bond, found that beneath every form of emotional testing, beneath every mind game and pattern of withdrawal and created distance, there is one fundamental question running at the biological level. Is your frame strong enough? Not, are you impressive? Not, are you the strongest candidate available? Is your emotional frame stable enough that I can finally stop managing everything alone? These 5 mind games are not obstacles she placed in your path. They are the specific evidence her nervous system requires to answer that question. Because the last man who was impressive cracked when it became real, and the last man who was perfect on paper had no real frame in the moments that actually required him to have one. Her wiring built these 5 mind games not to keep good men out. It built them to locate the one man whose emotional frame answers the question correctly, not with words, not with declarations, but with the specific quality of his presence in the moments designed to make most men break. And here is the piece that no one tells you. The architecture of these 5 mind games was never built to defeat you. It was built to find you. A man who understands this does not experience these 5 patterns as obstacles. He experiences them as precision, as the wiring of a woman who has been careful with herself for very good reasons, asking the only questions that have ever mattered to her in every interaction that mattered. And when her nervous system finally gathers enough evidence, when the manufactured distance returns a steady frame, when the threshold test returns calm groundedness, when the vulnerability calibration returns a frame solid enough to hold her truth, when the frame pressure returns a man who does not reorganize under her evaluation, when the silence probe returns a man who is comfortable with the unresolved, something releases in her that she has held carefully for a long time. There is a warmth that moves through her when that happens, not a warmth she decides to feel, one her nervous system releases when it has finally gathered enough evidence to believe that the answer is yes. That warmth is not casual attraction. It is the specific relief of a woman who built everything alone and is, perhaps for the first time in longer than she wants to say out loud, allowing herself to consider that she does not have to anymore. None of what you absorb today requires you to become someone you are not. It requires awareness, the specific awareness of a man who stopped operating from an incomplete map and now understands that what she was doing in those 5 mind games was never about you being insufficient. It was about her nervous system not yet having enough evidence that your emotional frame was real. The evidence is not delivered through grand gestures or perfectly constructed words. It is in the quality of your frame in the moments she designed to reveal whether it was genuine. And if you recognized a specific moment from your own past while listening to this, and you know if you did, that recognition is not coincidence. It is the beginning of a different kind of understanding that, once it is yours, changes every interaction you will ever have with a woman who matters to you. The men who stay here, who come back to this channel, tend to be the ones who recognized early that what they were hearing was not content. It was the map they had been missing. If this is the first time you have felt that, subscribing is simply the decision to keep going. Because there is more of this. There is always more. And the next video I want you to watch, because it is the piece that activates everything you just absorbed, is called Why She Tests You Hardest Right Before She Surrenders Completely. Because understanding these 5 mind games is only the first half of the architecture. The half most men never reach is understanding what happens on the other side of passing them, what she does next, why it can look for a moment like even more distance when it is actually the closest thing to surrender she is capable of, and why the men who stop at that exact threshold are the ones who lose the very thing they had finally earned. That video is already there, and you have come too far in the last 12 minutes to stop now.